Eleanor Blake stood at the crest of the long, winding driveway, her gaze fixed on the sprawling Victorian mansion that rose before her like a relic from another era. The wrought iron gates groaned softly as she pushed them open, the cold metal biting into her palms. A gust of wind swept through the ancient oak trees lining the estate, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, an unmistakable perfume of neglect and time past. The mansion's silhouette was jagged against the slate-grey sky, its ornate turrets and gables cast in shadow. The once pristine facade was now marred by peeling paint and creeping ivy that clung desperately to the walls. Eleanor's heart quickened, a mixture of excitement and unease fluttering in her chest. She had inherited this house under strange circumstances, a bequest from a distant relative she barely knew. But the mystery surrounding the property was what truly captivated her journalist's instinct. She pulled her coat tighter around her slender frame and stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath her polished boots. The heavy front door loomed ahead, its dark wood scarred by weather and time. With a tentative hand, Eleanor pushed it open. A musty breeze greeted her, carrying whispers of forgotten conversations and memories locked away. The grand foyer stretched out before her, its vastness emphasized by the fading light that filtered through stained glass windows high above. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, catching the last rays of sunlight like tiny stars suspended in silence. Eleanor's footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she crossed the threshold, her eyes tracing the intricate carvings of the banister spiraling upwards into darkness. A sudden creak startled her, and she turned sharply to see a figure approaching. Mr. Hargrove, the estate lawyer who had met her earlier in London, stepped into the room, his expression grave beneath thick-rimmed glasses. "Miss Blake," he began, his voice low and measured, "I trust your journey was uneventful." Eleanor nodded curtly. "The mansion is quite something." He smiled faintly, but there was a shadow behind his eyes. "Indeed, it carries the weight of many years. And, if I may be frank, some peculiar stories." "Peculiar stories," Eleanor echoed, arching an eyebrow. "The family has always been complicated," he said, glancing toward the grand staircase. "Your great-aunt Lillian was a woman of strong will and many secrets." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had heard the name before, whispered in old family tales as a figure shrouded in mystery. Secrets? What kind of secrets? Mr. Hargrove hesitated, then shook his head. "I'm afraid I'm bound by discretion, but I would advise caution as you settle in." Before Eleanor could press further, a soft voice interrupted. "Miss Blake, I have your room ready." Mrs. Whitlock appeared from the shadows, the housekeeper's austere presence grounding the moment. She was a sturdy woman, her eyes sharp but kind, her uniform tidy despite the weariness etched into her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitlock," Eleanor replied, following her down a dimly lit corridor lined with faded portraits and peeling wallpaper. The housekeeper's footsteps were steady, her voice a quiet murmur. "This place has seen better days, but it holds many memories. You must be patient with it." Eleanor nodded, her skepticism mingling with a growing fascination. As she settled into the modest guest chamber, she found herself drawn to the window overlooking the overgrown gardens. The branches swayed in the chill wind, casting eerie patterns on the cracked glass. That night, as the mansion creaked and groaned beneath the weight of history, Eleanor sat by the flickering candlelight, pen poised over her journal. The house seemed to breathe around her, whispering secrets she was determined to uncover. The legacy she had inherited was more than bricks and mortar, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. With a deep breath, she began to write. unaware that this first step would lead her into a labyrinth of lost letters, hidden identities, and family secrets that would change her life forever. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of a century-old mystery, beckoning Eleanor to listen closely. Eleanor Blake stood in the shadowed hallway of the Victorian mansion, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness that surrounded her. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of aged wood lingered in every corner. She had spent the better part of the afternoon wandering from room to room, each space frozen in time, draped in sheets and silence. Yet it was the attic door, tucked away behind a faded tapestry near the grand staircase, that now held her full attention. The door itself was a formidable barrier-solid oak with iron hinges darkened by age and neglect. A small brass keyhole glinted faintly beneath the grime, teasing Eleanor with the promise of secrets just beyond reach. She had found the key earlier that day, tucked inside an old bureau drawer in the master bedroom, its cool metal heavy in her palm. Now, standing before the door, she fumbled with the key, her fingers trembling slightly despite her usual composure. "Come on," she muttered to herself, finally coaxing the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted stubbornly, groaning like a reluctant beast before yielding with a soft click. Eleanor took a deep breath, bracing herself for what lay beyond. Pushing the door open released a long-forgotten chill that swept through the corridor. The attic was cloaked in shadows, the only light filtering through a narrow, grimy window high on the far wall. Dust motes danced in the fragile shafts of sunlight, settling over piles of forgotten belongings and the skeletal frames of broken furniture. The air smelled musty, tinged with the unmistakable aroma of old paper and wood slowly giving way to time. Eleanor stepped inside cautiously, her boots stirring up a soft carpet of dust that whispered beneath her feet. Her eyes scanned the cramped space, taking in the clutter. Battered trunks bound with cracked leather, stacks of yellowed books, and scattered bundles of newspapers. It was a treasure trove of the past, a hidden chamber frozen in a moment long gone. Drawn to one particular trunk, Eleanor knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the brittle leather straps. They snapped softly under her touch, the sound echoing in the stillness. With care, she lifted the heavy lid, revealing a trove of carefully preserved items. Bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons, sepia-toned photographs curling at the edges, and brittle documents whose ink had begun to fade. Her heart quickened. These were the whispers of lives once lived, fragments of stories waiting to be unearthed. She untied a bundle of letters, the paper crackling as she unfolded the fragile sheets. The handwriting was elegant, looping and precise, penned in ink that had mellowed to a soft brown. Eleanor's eyes scanned the opening lines, catching names and dates that hinted at a complicated family history. As she delved deeper into the letters, a faint sound interrupted the creak of the attic floorboards behind her. Eleanor spun around, the beam of her flashlight slicing through the darkness. The attic was empty, but a sudden gust rattled the window pane, scattering a few loose papers to the floor. She stooped quickly, gathering them before they could be lost forever. The discovery sent a shiver down her spine, not from the cold, but from the undeniable sense that these letters were the first thread in a tangled web of secrets. Eleanor straightened, the weight of the moment settling over her. This mansion, with its peeling wallpaper and forgotten corners, was far more than a relic of the past. It was a keeper of stories, some perhaps better left buried. Yet Eleanor was no stranger to stories, especially ones that refused to stay hidden. As a journalist, she thrived on uncovering truth, no matter how deeply it was concealed. With a resolute breath, she gathered the letters and photographs, already planning her next move. The attic door, once a barrier, had now opened a gateway, and Eleanor Blake intended to step through it fully, no matter where the path might lead. She paused at the threshold, glancing back once more into the shadowed room. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting, and Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. With the letters clutched in her hands and a spark of determination in her eyes, she descended the narrow staircase, ready to confront whatever secrets the past had left behind. Outside, the fading light of day cast long shadows across the estate, as if the mansion itself was drawing a veil over the mysteries hidden within its walls. But Eleanor Blake was undeterred. Every letter was a clue, every photograph a key, and she was ready to unlock the truth, one page at a time. As the night settled in, a storm quietly brewed on the horizon, promising that the journey ahead would be as turbulent as it was revealing. Eleanor could only wonder what storm lay within the forgotten words of those letters, where shadows would rise to meet her in the days to come. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, Eleanor prepared to delve deeper into the secrets of the mansion, unaware that the attic's discovery was the first step in a mystery that would challenge everything she believed. The attic was silent, except for the faint rustling of paper as Eleanor Blake carefully unfolded the first of the old letters. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the grimy window panes, casting dusty beams that danced across the wooden floorboards and illuminated the fragile yellowed pages she held. Each letter was tied with a faded blue ribbon, brittle with age, but inside, the carefully penned words were remarkably preserved. Eleanor's eyes scanned the elegant handwriting, the loops and flourishes of ink revealing the touch of a practiced hand. The letters were from a woman named Lillian Worthington. Her tone in the earliest correspondence was warm, even tender, addressing her brother with gentle affection. Eleanor felt a strange connection to the voice from the past. There was a vulnerability hidden beneath the formal language, a sense of longing and unresolved pain. As she progressed through the letters, however, the mood shifted. The once affectionate words grew colder, more guarded, and a palpable tension began to seep through the lines. Lillian wrote of family disputes, whispered rumors, and a scandal that had fractured relationships within the Worthington household. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she read a passage hinting at betrayal, a betrayal so profound that it threatened to unravel the family's reputation and legacy. The letters spoke of secrets kept in dark corners, of whispered accusations behind closed doors, and of a sorrow that lingered like a shadow over the grand estate. A sudden creak from the floor startled Eleanor. She looked up sharply, her heart quickening. The vast emptiness of the attic seemed to close in around her, the dim light flickering as the shadows deepened. She reminded herself that the mansion was old and that sounds like this were to be expected, yet the chill that ran down her spine was undeniable. The house was alive with its own stories, and Eleanor was beginning to understand that some of them were more than mere echoes of the past. Returning to the letters, Eleanor found one that was different. It was written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, the ink blotched in places as though the writer's emotions had spilled onto the page. This letter alluded to a family secret, something so dangerous that it had to be hidden away. The words were vague, but suggestive references to a scandal involving a death, a betrayal, and a silence that must be maintained at all costs. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the weight of the discovery settling on her shoulders. The skeptical journalist within her wrestled with the temptation to dismiss these as mere family drama, but the raw emotion in Lillian's voice was undeniable. This was more than gossip. It was a cry for truth from beyond the grave. Determined to uncover the full story, Eleanor gathered the letters and tucked them carefully into her satchel. She knew this was only the beginning. The mansion held its secrets tightly, but with each letter she read, the veil began to lift. Somewhere within these fragile pages lay the truth of what had shattered the Worthington family so many years ago. A truth Eleanor was now resolved to reveal, no matter the cost. The evening shadows lengthened as Eleanor descended the attic stairs, her mind alive with questions, her resolve hardening. The mansion was no longer just an inheritance. It was a mystery waiting to be solved, and she would be the one to unravel it. With a last glance back at the attic door, Eleanor whispered to herself, "The truth is in these letters, and I will find it." Her journey had truly begun. The attic was colder than Eleanor had expected, despite the late spring evening. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the thin candlelight flickering against the cracked wooden beams and casting long, wavering shadows on the faded wallpaper. The trunk she had pried open earlier tonight lay open beside her, spilling its fragile contents, yellowed letters, brittle photographs, and a scattering of old newspaper clippings. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded another letter, its ink faded but still legible. Lillian's words were careful, yet filled with an urgency that made Eleanor pause. The letter spoke of strained family bonds, whispered secrets, and a name that did not belong, an alias used to mask a dangerous truth. Eleanor's mind raced. The mention of a hidden identity was unexpected and unsettling. Why had no one mentioned this before? And what kind of secret would compel a family member to erase their own name? The house creaked around her, its wooden bones settling with a groan that echoed eerily through the empty rooms below. Eleanor's breath caught when a sudden draft swept through the attic, causing the candle to flicker wildly. She glanced toward the small window, its glass cracked and streaked with grime, and shivered despite the shawl. As she turned back to the letters, a faint sound reached her ears, soft creaking, like a floorboard shifting somewhere down the long hallway outside. Eleanor froze, straining to listen. The silence returned almost immediately, but the seed of unease had been planted. She wasn't alone in this house, or, if she was, the house itself seemed alive with restless memories. Tucking the letter carefully into her satchel, Eleanor descended the attic stairs slowly, her footsteps muffled against the threadbare carpet. At the end of the hall, the frosted glass of the study door shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Something moved behind it, a shadow slipping just out of clear view. Eleanor's heart pounded fiercely as she reached the door, hands trembling as she pressed an ear against the cold glass. No sound came, just the whispering wind outside and her own ragged breath. She pulled back, her skepticism wavering. The mansion was no longer just a relic of a forgotten past. It was a living enigma, its walls steeped in secrets that demanded to be uncovered. The letters hinted at a murder, one that had never been resolved, and Eleanor could no longer dismiss the strange happenings as mere coincidence or the house settling after years of neglect. Back in the parlor, Eleanor lit the fireplace, the crackling flames casting a warm glow that pushed back the shadows but did little to calm her racing thoughts. She spread the letters across the polished mahogany table, eyes scanning the elegant script. One letter stood out, a confession written in a hand that seemed deliberately disguised, the words trembling with fear and desperation. It spoke of betrayal, hidden identities, and a murder that had been carefully concealed beneath layers of lies. The storm outside began to build, rain tapping insistently against the windows, the wind howling through the eaves like a mournful chorus. Eleanor felt the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on her, a silent challenge to uncover the truth buried in its darkest corners. She reached for her notebook and began to write, piecing together the fragmented story from the letters. The mystery was no longer just an academic curiosity. It was a puzzle she was determined to solve, even if it meant confronting shadows both literal and figurative. As midnight approached, Eleanor stood by the window, staring out into the garden shrouded in mist. The house groaned around her, and for a moment she thought she heard a whisper carried on the wind. The past was calling, and Eleanor knew she had taken her first step into a story that would change everything. But who had hidden behind the veil of secrecy, and why? That question haunted her as she blew out the candle and prepared to face whatever truths the coming days would bring. The late afternoon sun dipped low behind the dense trees surrounding the Victorian mansion, casting long shadows over the cracked stone path leading to the grand entrance. Eleanor Blake stood by the oak door, her gloved fingers tracing the intricate carvings as a sudden sound broke the silence, the clip-clop of hooves on gravel. She turned sharply, eyes narrowing through the swirling mist that had begun to creep in with the evening chill. A solitary carriage emerged from the fog, its black paint dulled by years of neglect but still gleaming faintly under the dying light. The driver pulled the reins, bringing the horse to a slow halt. With a polite nod, he lifted his worn hat and climbed down, vanishing almost immediately into the shadows of the overgrown garden. Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. Visitors were rare in this forgotten place, especially unannounced ones. The carriage window rolled down with a soft creak, and a man's voice, smooth and measured, called out, "Miss Blake." She stepped forward, her boots clicking on the stone steps as the carriage door opened. A figure emerged, tall, lean, and impeccably dressed, despite the evident age of his clothing. His eyes, a piercing shade of grey, seemed to appraise the mansion with a familiarity that unsettled Eleanor. "I am Ambrose Sinclair," he said, tipping his weathered felt hat. "I believe we have much to discuss about your new home." Eleanor's brows knitted in cautious surprise. "I wasn't expecting company. How did you find me?" Mr. Sinclair smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth turning up with a hint of knowing. "The history of this mansion is not so easily forgotten, Miss Blake. Some of us have been keeping watch." Reluctantly, Eleanor stepped aside to let him in. The heavy door groaned shut behind them, sealing the outside world away. Inside, the mansion's vast drawing room was cloaked in shadows, the last rays of sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the worn Persian rugs. Mr. Sinclair surveyed the room with an almost reverential air. "It still holds its secrets," he murmured, "though some have been buried far too long." Eleanor motioned to a pair of high-backed chairs by the fireplace. "If you're here to share those secrets, I'm listening. But be warned, I'm not easily convinced by ghost stories." He chuckled softly, settling into a chair. "Good. Skepticism is a valuable trait. But facts, Miss Blake, facts are what I bring." The fire crackled, sending flickering light across their faces as Mr. Sinclair began to recount tales of the mansion's former inhabitants. Stories intertwined with whispers of betrayal, lost love, and a murder that had shaken the family to its core a century ago. Eleanor listened intently, her journalist's instincts sharpening. His knowledge was unsettlingly precise, revealing intimate details she had not uncovered in any of her research. How could a stranger know so much? Her mind raced with questions, suspicion warring with intrigue. As the evening deepened, the conversation grew more charged. Eleanor pressed him for names, dates, motives, but Mr. Sinclair remained elusive, offering hints rather than outright answers. "The truth," he said, "is often best uncovered piece by piece." Just as the clock chimed 10, A sudden knock echoed through the hall. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Mr. Sinclair's eyes flicked to the door, a shadow crossing his features. But before she could react, he rose smoothly, donning his hat. "I must take my leave," he said, voice low but resolute. "There is much to consider, and time is not on our side." Eleanor accompanied him to the door, the night air cold and heavy with mist. As Mr. Sinclair's silhouette retreated down the path, swallowed by the fog, she felt the mansion itself seem to exhale, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. Left alone, Eleanor stood rooted on the threshold, her thoughts a turbulent storm. The visitor had opened a new chapter in her investigation, one that promised answers but also danger. Who was Ambrose Sinclair, and what role did he play in the century-old mystery she was determined to solve? With a renewed sense of purpose, Eleanor closed the door behind her, the lock clicking into place as the night deepened around the ancient walls. The game had changed, and she was ready to play.